You're listening to Trace Hunt Radio. We explore the darkest chapters of true crime, unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and the twisted minds behind them. Follow the blood, chase the clues, uncover the truth. Stay sharp. The hunt begins now.
The curtain rises, the spotlight burns bright, and the audience leans forward, ready for magic. For decades, this grand old theater had been a house of dreams, where music, laughter, and applause filled the air. But when renovations began after years of silence, workers uncovered something far darker than forgotten costumes or dusty scripts. Beneath the warped wooden boards of the stage lay a hidden chamber, and inside it, skeletons dressed in tattered costumes, their bones arranged as though they were still waiting for the show to begin. What should have been a place of performance was instead a crypt of secrets, and the theater itself became the stage for a murder mystery buried in time. Who were these people? Were they actors who vanished from the cast list, victims of a jealous director, or unlucky souls silenced to protect a scandal? Even more chilling, among the remains was a diary, its pages smeared with ink and anguish, hinting at an obsession so twisted it blurred the line between art and madness. Tonight, we unraveled the story of murder in the spotlight, bones found beneath the stage, a tale where ambition turns deadly, and the applause hides screams that were never heard. Chapter 1: The Discovery Beneath the Stage. The theater stood like a sleeping giant at the edge of the old quarter. Its facade, once white with marble, was now stained gray with soot and time. Broken posters still clung to its front doors, faded advertisements for plays no one had seen in decades. For years, it had been abandoned, left to pigeons and graffiti. But one autumn morning, the silence broke. A construction crew arrived to begin renovations, tasked with breathing life into the once glorious hall. The workers expected dust, rats, maybe a collapsed ceiling. What they didn't expect was the sound of a hollow echo beneath their boots. As they tore up the rotting floorboards of the main stage, a gap appeared, a narrow seam leading down into darkness. Someone muttered about an old storage crawlspace. Another joked about buried treasure. But when a lantern was lowered through the opening, laughter died. Below, the beam of light caught not forgotten props, but pale shapes curved like broken question marks. Bones, dozens of them. When authorities arrived, they widened the opening, revealing a hidden chamber directly beneath the stage. It was no storage space, it was a tomb. The skeletons weren't dumped, they were arranged. Some were fragments of costumes, a tattered velvet cloak, a half-crumbling mask, slippers that had fused with bone. They sat as though frozen mid-performance, heads tilted toward an audience that would never return. In the far corner lay something stranger still, a small leather-bound diary. Its cover warped by time, but its pages intact. The first line, scrawled in frantic handwriting, read, "The play must never end, and they must never leave." Chapter 2: The Theater's Haunted Past. The theater had once been the pride of the city. When it opened in 1898, newspaper headlines hailed it as a palace for the arts. Its marble columns and gilded balconies rivaled anything in Paris or Vienna. The grand chandelier, imported from Italy, glittered above velvet seats that could hold more than 1,000 guests. On opening night, the audience filled every row, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, their eyes alight with wonder as the first curtain rose. But grandeur carries shadows. From its earliest days, the theater seemed cursed by misfortune. Within its first decade, 3 actors died mysteriously during productions. One collapsed mid-scene, his throat tightening as if strangled by unseen hands. Another fell from the rafters during a matinee, though he had been known as the most agile stagehand in the troupe. Whispers spread quickly, the theater takes what it wants. Yet the tragedies only deepened its allure. Patrons flocked, hungry for drama both on and off stage. Directors competed to premiere their most daring works there, drawn by the mystique of a stage rumored to demand blood for brilliance. Critics claimed the performances carried an intensity, unlike anywhere else, as though the actors themselves were dancing on the edge of mortality. By the 1920s, the theater reached its golden age. Jazz bands warmed the audience before plays began. International stars crossed its boards, but with fame came scandal. Rumors circulated of affairs between actors and patrons of influence. There were whispers of debts, blackmail, and disappearances. Police reports hinted at missing chorus girls who left their apartments one night and never returned. Each disappearance was dismissed as a runaway, a young dreamer burned out by the harsh light of the stage. Few ever questioned the theater's role in their vanishing. Behind the glamour stood its last and most infamous director, Victor Bellamy. To the public, he was a genius, tall, sharp-featured, with a gaze that could silence a room. He demanded perfection from his performers, often rehearsing them until dawn. To his cast, he was both mentor and tyrant. Bellamy spoke often of immortality, not for himself, but for art. He wanted to create a performance so flawless, so eternal that it would never fade, even when the theater closed its doors. Art is not life, he once declared in an interview. It is more than life. And if life must be sacrificed for it, then so be it. His words, printed then as eccentric philosophy, read now like prophecy. The theater's decline came abruptly in 1934, when a new production, a tragic opera written by Bellamy himself, was suddenly canceled mid-run. No official reason was ever given. Some said the lead actress had fallen ill. Others whispered of something worse, that an entire cast had disappeared overnight, and the play was buried along with them. Within months, the theater shuttered. The chandelier was dimmed, the doors locked, and Bellamy vanished from public record. For decades afterward, the building sat abandoned. Locals called it haunted. Children dared each other to sneak inside, swearing they heard whispers behind the curtains or the faint sound of applause when no one was there. Homeless squatters avoided it, claiming the air inside was wrong, heavy with something unseen. And yet, despite the fear, the theater was never demolished. City officials cited structural safety or historical value, but some residents believed there was another reason. The theater refused to die. By the time construction crews broke through the stage floor nearly a century later, the building's sinister reputation had long become folklore. But the bones beneath the boards proved that the stories weren't just legend. They were history, and the truth was darker than anyone had imagined. Chapter 3: Identifying the Dead. The chamber beneath the stage was like a silent audience. The skeletons sat propped against the damp walls, some arranged in lifelike positions as if frozen mid-performance. To investigators, it was less a burial site than a grotesque tableau, one designed with intention. But who were these lost souls? The first step was forensic examination. Specialists moved slowly, cataloging each bone, each scrap of fabric, each corroded button and rusted clasp. Under the dim glow of portable lamps, fragments of costumes emerged, velvet gowns eaten by moths, sequined masks, brittle shoes curled inward with age. The details mattered, for these remnants carried clues. Dr. Helena Strauss, the lead forensic anthropologist, studied the bones with meticulous care. Many skeletons bore signs of blunt force trauma, fractures to skulls, ribs snapped inward as if crushed. Others revealed thinner lines, shallow cuts across wrists and throats. But one detail haunted her most. Some victims' jaws were found open, locked in a silent scream. These weren't anonymous bodies, Strauss murmured. These were performers. Investigators turned to archives. The theater's history had been heavily documented in newspapers, society pages, and playbills that recorded every production, every name. In the yellowed stacks of the city library, detectives sifted through lists of actors from the 1920s and 1930s, comparing descriptions with the forensic evidence. One discovery jolted the investigation. A sequin slipper found on one skeleton matched a publicity photo of Clara Devine, a rising star of the 1930s who had vanished mysteriously during rehearsals for Victor Bellamy's final play. Clara had been celebrated for her voice, a soprano that critics claimed could cut through glass. Her disappearance had been dismissed at the time as a scandal-driven retreat, with rumors she had eloped with a wealthy patron. But her bones told another story. She had never left the stage. Piece by piece, other identities surfaced. A man's skeleton bore a healed-leg fracture consistent with a notorious incident involving Daniel Kessler, an actor who had broken his leg in a fall but returned to the stage with a cane, determined to keep performing. A fragment of costume, a cloak embroidered with golden stars, matched the wardrobe sketch for his last known role. Another set of remains included a silver locket, tarnished but intact. Inside was a photograph of a child. Theater records revealed it belonged to Margot Albright, a seamstress who often doubled as an understudy. She, too, had vanished during the production that never premiered. Each name pulled from the dust rewrote history. These were not runaways or forgotten actors who abandoned their careers. They were victims, entombed beneath the boards of the very stage where they once sought glory. As the identities emerged, so did the timeline. All the missing seemed tied to one production: Bellamy's unfinished opera, The Eternal Masquerade. The diary found in the chamber grew even more significant. Its entries, though fragmented, spoke of keeping the cast intact and a performance that cannot end. What had once been considered artistic madness now pointed to deliberate murder. But the mystery deepened when investigators noticed something unsettling. The chamber wasn't large enough to account for all who had vanished. Newspaper reports listed at least a dozen missing performers, yet only 7 skeletons had been recovered. Where were the others? Had they been buried elsewhere? Hidden deeper still? Or could it be that not all the missing had died? That some had escaped, carrying the terrible secret with them? The city buzzed with speculation as headlines declared, "Theater of Bones cold case reopens after 90 years." Crowds gathered at the site, some out of morbid curiosity, others clutching old photographs of grandparents who had once performed on that stage. For the descendants of the missing, the discovery was both relief and torment. Closure had finally arrived, but so had confirmation of their darkest fears. And through it all, one question echoed louder than applause. Did Victor Bellamy kill his cast to preserve his vision? Chapter 4. The Director's Vision. Victor Bellamy was more than a director. To some, he was a visionary. To others, he was a tyrant. But to those who knew him well, he was a man consumed by an obsession that blurred the line between genius and madness. Born into privilege in 1889, Bellamy grew up in a household steeped in literature, art, and music. His father was a financier with a taste for the avant-garde, and his mother a pianist who once studied in Paris. Victor, their only child, inherited both money and a restless mind. He was educated abroad, dabbling in philosophy and stagecraft before returning, home with dreams of transforming theater into something greater than mere entertainment. From the moment he took control of the city's Grand Theater, Bellamy spoke of a singular vision, a play so powerful it would outlive its performers. He claimed art was too fragile, trapped by mortality. Actors die, sets crumble, scripts fade, he told a journalist in 1927. But what if we could bind them together, immortalize them as part of the work itself? What if a play could be eternal? To his admirers, this was poetic rhetoric. To his cast, it was unsettling doctrine. Bellamy's rehearsals were infamous. He demanded his performers rehearse until exhaustion, sometimes locking the theater doors until dawn. He insisted they abandon personal lives, declaring, "On this stage, you are not people. You are art, you belong to the play, not yourselves." Many actors quit under his rule, calling him cruel, manipulative, even dangerous. But those who stayed often became devoted to him, entranced by his charisma and promises of everlasting fame. Bellamy knew how to weave words into spells. He could make suffering sound like sacrifice and obedience feel like destiny. The peak of his ambition came with his self-written opera, The Eternal Masquerade. Unlike anything staged before, it combined music, dance, and symbolic spectacle. Bellamy claimed it would be his masterpiece, the work that defined not only his career but the very future of theater. He told his cast they would live forever in their roles. The script, though only fragments survive, hinted at themes of death, rebirth, and masks that no one could remove. The stage design, sketched in Bellamy's hand, included hidden trapdoors and chambers beneath the boards, spaces eerily similar to the tomb later discovered. Whether these were intended as theatrical devices or something more sinister remains unclear. The diary found with the skeletons added chilling weight to suspicions. Phrases like, "The audience must never know the truth," and "they belong to the play forever," echoed Bellamy's own philosophy. But was it his hand that wrote the words? The handwriting was never conclusively matched. Some experts believed it was Bellamy's private journal. Others suggested it might have been written by an assistant or even one of the doomed actors themselves, recording their final days. Police files from the 1930s revealed whispers of misconduct, but no charges were ever brought against Bellamy. He was too influential, too well-connected. Patrons of wealth and power defended him, dismissing complaints as the exaggerations of disgruntled performers. When actors disappeared, officials chalked it up to scandal, elopement, or a pursuit of fame elsewhere. In truth, many were last seen walking into Bellamy's theater and never walking out. By 1934, as rehearsals for the Eternal Masquerade reached their height, the theater grew increasingly secretive. Curtains remained drawn, rehearsals barred from public view. Neighbors reported hearing strange music and muffled screams late into the night, and then, suddenly, silence. The play was canceled, the cast gone, and the theater closed within weeks. Bellamy himself vanished soon after. Some claimed he fled the country, others insisted he went mad and died in obscurity. No body was ever found. His name faded into rumor, preserved only in the dust of the abandoned stage and the hushed stories of locals who dared to remember. For investigators nearly a century later, Bellamy's visions seemed less like art and more like obsessions spiraled into murder. His idea of eternal theater had been realized, but not as he promised. Instead of creating immortality through performance, he had entombed his cast beneath the stage, turning them into literal relics of his madness. And yet, a lingering unease haunted the investigation. If Bellamy truly orchestrated this macabre tableau, where had he gone? And why did the diary hint at more victims than the skeletons found? Was it possible some survived? Or worse, that Bellamy had taken his twisted vision elsewhere, staging new performances in secret? The theater's story was no longer just about bones and dust. It was about a director who sought eternity and may have achieved it, not through art, but through infamy. Chapter 5. The Diary of Obsession. The leather-bound diary was fragile, its pages yellowed and brittle, edges crumbling under the slightest touch. Yet the words inside were sharp, preserved with eerie clarity. They carried the voice of someone who believed every stroke of the pen was as important as scripture. At first, investigators thought the book belonged to one of the victims. But as they read, a chilling pattern emerged: the tone, the arrogance, the obsession with art. It sounded like Victor Bellamy himself. The entries began innocuously enough, chronicling rehearsals, casting notes, and fragments of dialogue. "Clara's soprano pierces like a dagger. She must carry Act 2, one line read. Another noted, Kessler limps beautifully, adds authenticity. These seemed like the meticulous jottings of a director preparing for his magnum opus. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The diary descended into something darker, a manifesto. The stage is sacred ground. The audience believes they come for illusion, but I know the truth. We can transcend illusion. The performance does not need to end. They give themselves to me, their voices, their bodies, their lives. I will give them back eternity." The entries grew increasingly detached from reality. Bellamy wrote of binding the cast together, of keeping them where they can never falter. At one point, he described the stage itself as a tomb and a temple. The most chilling passage came midway through. "Tonight I seal the boards. They will perform for me always beneath the floor. The audience will applaud above them, never knowing that the true art lies below. They are mine, eternal players in a play that will never end." The words left even seasoned detectives shaken. This wasn't just the rambling of a delusional artist. It was a confession, a record of premeditated murder cloaked as philosophy. But the diary wasn't only a glimpse into Bellamy's mind. It was also a map. Along the margins of several pages were sketches of the theater's understructure, hidden corridors, trapdoors, and narrow passages winding beneath the stage. Some of these drawings matched the chamber where the skeletons were found. Others suggested there were still undiscovered rooms. Excavation crews returned, prying deeper into the foundation. What they uncovered was both fascinating and horrifying. Another sealed chamber, smaller but no less haunting. Inside were decayed props, masks, costumes, and a half-finished set piece shaped like a coffin. No bodies were found there, but on the walls, faint writing in chalk-spelled words that echoed Bellamy's diary. The play is eternal. Forensic analysts pored over the handwriting. While many experts agreed it matched Bellamy's, some noted discrepancies. Letters formed differently, strokes uneven. Could it have been written by someone imitating him, perhaps an assistant or disciple? The idea raised an even more unsettling possibility. Was Bellamy working alone? Or had others been complicit in his vision? Meanwhile, archivists compared the diary against historical records. One entry mentioned a date, March 17, 1934. That night, according to surviving playbills, was supposed to be the grand debut of the Eternal Masquerade, but the show never happened. Instead, March 17th was the last day any of the missing casts were seen alive. The diary filled in the silence history had left behind. Bellamy hadn't simply canceled his play, he had ended it with blood. The revelations gripped the city. Headlines screamed, "The director's confession diary reveals murderous obsession." Journalists dissected every page, publishing excerpts that horrified and fascinated the public in equal measure. Theater enthusiasts debated whether Bellamy was insane or simply a man so devoted to his art that he abandoned morality. Conspiracy theorists suggested the diary might be a forgery planted to protect the real killers. But for the families of the victims, the diary was both a curse and a gift. It proved what had long been whispered: their loved ones hadn't run away. They had been consumed by the theater, trapped by a man who saw them not as people, but as instruments of immortality. Detective Anna Riedel, who led the modern investigation, put it bluntly in a press conference. Bellamy believed art required sacrifice. He sacrificed human lives. This wasn't devotion to theater, it was murder, meticulously planned and executed. And yet, one haunting question remained. Where was Bellamy now? The diary ended abruptly, mid-sentence. The curtain falls, but only for them. For me, the stage. The final line trailed off, ink smudged as though interrupted. Did he flee as police closed in? Was he silenced by someone who knew too much? Or had he chosen to vanish into his own legend, leaving the city forever haunted by unanswered questions? The diary had given investigators answers, but it had also opened doors to mysteries they were not sure they wanted to solve. Chapter 6: The Curse of the Stage. Long before the bones were unearthed, long before Bellamy's diary was found, whispers already clung to the theater like cobwebs. The building had been called cursed for nearly a century, and locals avoided it as if the walls themselves breathed misfortune. What investigators revealed only gave terrifying context to the ghost stories that had thrived in the city for decades. The first rumors began shortly after the abrupt closure in 1934. Residents near the theater swore they heard noises at night, not the usual groans of wood and settling beams, but unmistakable sounds. Muffled crying, faint singing, and sometimes applause echoing through the walls. Children dared one another to press their ears against the locked doors, claiming they heard footsteps pacing back and forth across the empty stage. By the 1940s, the building's reputation as a haunted site was solidified. A night watchman reported doors slamming shut behind him, leaving him locked in until morning. He quit after only 3 shifts, telling police that he saw shadows moving in the orchestra pit, though no one else was inside. The city attempted to sell the property multiple times. Each attempt failed. Investors who expressed interest either backed out after stepping inside or suffered sudden, inexplicable misfortunes, accidents, illnesses, even suicides. Rumors spread that anyone who tried to profit from the theater was marked by Bellamy's so-called eternal play. In 1957, a group of teenagers broke into the theater on Halloween night. They brought flashlights, cigarettes, and bravado, determined to prove the curse was nothing but local superstition. But when they emerged hours later, one of them was missing. Police searched for weeks, finding only a discarded shoe and a flashlight with dead batteries near a sealed trapdoor. The missing boy was never seen again. His friends never spoke of what happened inside, but one admitted years later that they heard voices singing in the dark, voices that weren't theirs. The legend only grew. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and urban explorers began sneaking into the theater. Many reported strange phenomena, sudden cold spots, the sensation of being watched, and the sound of music playing faintly from nowhere. One explorer captured a photograph that seemed to show a figure standing in the balcony, cloaked, mask-like face gleaming, though the group insisted they were alone. The discovery of the skeletons beneath the stage in the 21st century gave these stories horrifying validation. What had once been dismissed as superstition was now grounded in brutal truth. The so-called curse wasn't just a ghost story. It was the echo of real tragedy. But the curse wasn't merely supernatural. It was practical, psychological, and social. For families of the missing, the theater was a wound that never healed. For performers in the city, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder that art could devour those who gave too much to it. Even modern actors avoided speaking Bellamy's name aloud, fearing it might invite misfortune. Some believe the curse lay not in restless spirits, but in the building itself. The architecture of the stage and its underground chambers created strange acoustics, amplifying small sounds into haunting echoes. Drafts through broken windows explained sudden chills. Psychological suggestion filled in the rest. But even skeptics admitted that the coincidence of so many tragedies around the theater was hard to dismiss. Detective Anna Riedel, leading the modern investigation, noted in her private report that the curse might have been deliberately cultivated. Bellamy, obsessed with controlling his art, may have encouraged ghostly rumors to keep prying eyes away. The diary hinted at as much in one entry. Let them whisper of curses and shadows. Fear is the strongest lock. The audience must remain outside. This suggested Bellamy not only accepted the rumors, he weaponized them. By turning his theater into a place of dread, he ensured his crimes beneath the stage would go unnoticed. Still, some investigators weren't so quick to dismiss the supernatural. Forensic teams who worked the excavation reported technical malfunctions that defied explanation, lights flickering, equipment shutting down without reason. One specialist claimed to hear someone humming behind him as he cataloged bones. I turned and there was no one there, he recalled. But the air smelled of dust and perfume. Whether curse, coincidence, or consequence, the theater's reputation became inseparable from the murders. The city debated what to do with it. Some demanded it be demolished, the land purified of its horrors. Others argued for preservation, not as a performance venue, but as a memorial museum to the victims. The debate split the community, echoing the tension between honoring history and burying it forever. Ultimately, the curse of the stage wasn't about spirits or creaking boards. It was about memory. The building carried the weight of vanished lives, silenced voices, and art twisted into cruelty. The curse was the truth itself, that a man's obsession could kill, and that his theater had become a mausoleum where applause would never be heard again. And yet, as the investigation pushed forward, the curse deepened. New evidence suggested that Bellamy's crimes may not have ended in that single theater. The diary hinted at other performances, other casts he may have taken with him. If that were true, then the curse had spread far beyond the stage. The city's nightmare was not just a haunting, it was unfinished business. Chapter 7. Behind the Curtain. The curtain had fallen on Bellamy's theater in 1934, but fragments of memory lived on in the people who had once worked there or in the stories their children and grandchildren carried. Detectives and historians scoured the city archives, tracked down descendants, and conducted interviews. What emerged was a chilling patchwork of testimony, rumors, and anecdotes. Each story peeled back another layer of what really happened in those last months before the theater's sudden closure. The first breakthrough came from the family of Margaret Maggie O'Donnell, who had worked as a costume seamstress. Maggie's granddaughter still kept a box of her belongings, sewing needles, old scraps of fabric, and, most importantly, a small bundle of letters Maggie had written but never mailed. One letter described working late into the night, hearing muffled shouting through the floorboards, as though something was happening in the hidden chambers beneath the stage. I swear I had someone call out, "Help me!" But when I asked Mr. Bellamy, he smiled and told me I was listening to the play itself. He said the stage remembers every word ever spoken upon it, and sometimes it repeats the strongest ones. I wanted to believe him, but the voice I heard was not part of any script I've ever read. The words sent shivers down the spine of every investigator who read them. Next came testimony from the son of Carl Weiss, a stagehand who worked lighting rigs. Carl had always told his children that the theater was cursed. He described one particular night when Bellamy insisted that rehearsals be conducted in complete secrecy, with only select cast and crew allowed inside. When Carl tried to peek in, he found the stage dark except for a single spotlight, under which the actors stood motionless, wearing masks that concealed their faces. According to Carl's son, his father fled that night and never returned to the theater. He had told his children, "Those weren't rehearsals, they were rituals." Other accounts painted a similar picture of escalating strangeness. A janitor's nephew recalled his uncle saying that Bellamy forbade anyone from entering the basement storage rooms. He said Mr. Bellamy kept props down there that no one was allowed to touch. But the strange thing was, the basement was locked, and yet every morning the dust around the door looked disturbed, like it had been opened in the night. One of the most haunting recollections came from an elderly woman named Clara Vogel, who had once been a young usher. She claimed to have seen Bellamy late one evening, after the theater was supposed to be closed. He was kneeling at the edge of the stage, she said, her voice trembling even decades later, whispering to the boards as though the wood could hear him. When he noticed me, he stood up and told me, "The stage is alive and it listens. One day it will never let them leave." At the time, Clara dismissed it as the ramblings of an eccentric man. Only years later, after the discoveries, did she realize how literal those words had been. As investigators pieced these testimonies together, a picture emerged of a director who had moved from eccentricity into madness. He had isolated his cast, controlled his crew through fear, and turned the rehearsal process into something closer to indoctrination. Performers weren't simply rehearsing lines. They were surrendering themselves to Bellamy's vision. Detective Anna Riedel described it in her report as a cult masquerading as a production. The actors, dependent on Bellamy for their careers, likely obeyed him even when his demands grew sinister. They trusted him, and that trust became their undoing. But there were hints of resistance. A stagehand's journal uncovered in the archives contained a cryptic entry from March 1934. "I won't be back. The things he asks us to do are not theater. They are something else. If anyone finds this, tell the truth. We were afraid of him, afraid of what was beneath the floor." This suggested that some crew members had realized the danger, but chose silence rather than confrontation. Fear, after all, was as powerful a lock as any iron door. Investigators also noticed an unsettling pattern. Several witnesses mentioned hearing music, not from the orchestra pit, but from somewhere beneath the stage. One remembered hearing violins when no musicians were present. Another claimed that during rehearsals, the cast sometimes moved in eerie synchronization, as though they were following music only they could hear. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that Bellamy's rehearsals had blurred the line between performance and possession. The theater wasn't just a stage. It was a trap, and every rehearsal was a rehearsal for death. The testimonies did more than just humanize the victims. They showed how Bellamy's crimes had gone unnoticed. Each witness had seen only fragments, a locked door here, a strange sound there, an odd demand from the director. None of them saw the whole picture. Only now, decades later, with skeletons unearthed and diaries read, Could the truth be stitched together like the final act of a long-lost play? For the families of the victims, these accounts were devastating. The letters, journals, and recollections proved that their loved ones had likely known something was wrong, but were too frightened or too loyal to leave. The theater hadn't just stolen their lives. It had stolen their voices, silencing them beneath the boards. And yet, there was a final twist. Among the recollections was one from a woman whose grandmother had been a dancer in the chorus. According to her, the grandmother once told her in a hushed, fearful tone, Victor wasn't the only one. There were others. People who helped him. People who clapped when no audience was there. If true, this suggested Bellamy hadn't acted alone. The idea of accomplices reopened the possibility that some of those responsible had never been caught, or perhaps had blended back into society, carrying their secrets to the grave. Behind the curtain, the play had never really ended. Its echoes were still being heard, decades later, as investigators struggled to untangle performance from crime and theater from murder. Chapter 8: Reconstruction of the Crime. By the time the bones were unearthed and the diaries studied, investigators had enough fragments to attempt the impossible, to reconstruct, step by step, how Victor Bellamy turned a theater into a tomb. It was not an ordinary murder case. It was an elaborate performance of death, scripted with precision and executed with theatrical flourish. The reconstruction began with the stage itself. Forensic architects surveyed the building's understructure. They discovered hidden trapdoors and concealed crawl spaces that were not part of the official blueprints. These passages connected dressing rooms, orchestra pits, and a labyrinth of storage chambers directly beneath the stage. In one of these chambers, the remains of at least 6 victims were discovered, each carefully arranged as though positioned for an audience that would never arrive. Experts realized Bellamy had designed the theater itself as a weapon. Some of the hidden spaces bore scorch marks and strange acoustic modifications, as if Bellamy had been experimenting with sound and lighting in ways never meant for public performances. The diary hinted at this obsession. The stage is both sanctuary and snare. They believe they are practicing art, but they are rehearsing eternity. The sequence of the crimes likely unfolded during late-night private rehearsals. Witness accounts suggested that Bellamy deliberately isolated certain performers under the guise of perfecting difficult scenes. He demanded loyalty, secrecy, and submission to his artistic vision. Those who entered these rehearsals rarely emerged the same, if they emerged at all. Forensic anthropologists analyzed the skeletal remains. The evidence revealed a disturbing pattern. Victims bore marks consistent with restraint. Wrist and ankle bones displayed abrasions, suggesting they had been bound. Some skulls showed fractures, blunt force trauma carefully concealed by burial under heavy beams. Others had knife marks, shallow and theatrical, as if inflicted not merely to kill but to mimic stage combat. The chilling detail? Many of the victims were found dressed in fragments of costume, period gowns, masks, and stage uniforms preserved beneath the rubble. It was as though Bellamy had forced them to die as characters, not as people. The timeline began to sharpen. Cross-referencing diary entries with theater records, investigators determined that Bellamy orchestrated the murders during the theater's last major production, The Fall of Orpheus, in 1934. Publicly, the show was canceled due to financial ruin. Privately, Bellamy had begun a darker act. Detectives theorized the crimes followed a ritualistic sequence. Casting the victims, Bellamy selected vulnerable actors and crew, often those who relied most heavily on him for work or housing. His charm and influence made it easy to lure them in. Private rehearsals, victims were called after hours, separated from the main cast. Witnesses remembered faint music and masked figures moving in the dark. These rehearsals were Bellamy's method of indoctrination, blurring art with reality. The final performance. At some point, the rehearsals escalated. Victims were restrained beneath the stage, forced into costumes, and compelled to perform their roles. Bellamy, obsessed with the perfection of art, seemed to view their deaths as the ultimate expression, a play that could never be criticized, because the cast would never leave. Curtain call, after the murders, Bellamy meticulously concealed the bodies in the understructure, arranging them as if frozen mid-performance. The stage above remained intact, hiding the truth beneath years of dust and silence. Psychologists consulted on the case described Bellamy as suffering from grandiose delusions mixed with sadistic control. To him, the murders were not crimes, but art, permanent performances that transcended the ordinary limits of theater. His victims became unwilling actors in his eternal production. The curse of the stage, once whispered as folklore, now had a terrifyingly logical explanation. The strange noises people claimed to hear, footsteps, voices, even music, could be traced to the theater's acoustic design. But when coupled with the knowledge of what had truly happened beneath the boards, those echoes took on chilling new meaning. Perhaps the most haunting piece of evidence came from Bellamy's diary. An actor's greatest fear is to be forgotten. I have cured them of that. Beneath my stage, they will never leave. Beneath my stage, the play will never end. Forensic reconstructions turned this quote into a literal map of horror. Computer-generated imagery overlaid the skeleton's positions with the layout of the stage above. The results revealed that Bellamy had arranged the bodies in a tableau, mirroring a climactic scene from The Fall of Orpheus. Each victim had been forced into the role of a character from the script, their deaths staged to mirror myth itself. The case was no longer about a deranged director and his unfortunate victims. It was about the weaponization of theater itself. Bellamy had used the trust of his cast, the architecture of the stage, and the trappings of performance to disguise his crimes for decades. When detectives presented their reconstruction to the public, it stunned the city. Families of the victims wept as they learned the truth. Their loved ones hadn't simply vanished. They had been trapped in a play that was never meant to end. Even as the details emerged, questions lingered. How many victims were there in total? The remains found so far numbered fewer than the missing persons connected to the theater. Did Bellamy dispose of others elsewhere? And most disturbingly, had he acted alone? Several accounts hinted at accomplices, masked figures, stagehands who clapped when no audience was present. If so, then the full cast of Bellamy's deadly play had never been revealed. The reconstruction didn't bring closure. It opened more doors. What investigators pieced together was only Act 1 of a larger mystery. Behind the curtain, other secrets waited. The theater might have been silent, but its final act had yet to be written. Chapter 9: The Trial That Never Happened. By the time the remains beneath Bellamy's theater were fully uncovered, the city expected justice to follow. Newspapers ran headlines demanding a trial, calling the discovery the most grotesque crime in theatrical history. Families of the victims rallied together, determined that Victor Bellamy's name would finally be dragged into the courtroom and condemned. But justice never came. The simple, maddening fact was this: Victor Bellamy had disappeared long before anyone realized what he had done. The collapse of the theater in 1934, which had been blamed on bankruptcy and structural decay, was in fact the closing act of his crime. He vanished with it, leaving behind no body, no confession, and no trace. Detectives tried to reconstruct his last movements. Financial records showed Bellamy had liquidated several of his accounts in the weeks leading up to the theater's closure. Witnesses recalled him speaking of a new project in another city, but no such production was ever staged. Others claimed he had booked passage on a ship to South America, though passenger lists were inconclusive. The lack of a corpse meant there was no certainty of his fate. Some believed he perished in the collapse, entombed in the very theater he had turned into a tomb. Others argued he had planned his disappearance too carefully, escaping under a new identity to continue his twisted obsessions elsewhere. This uncertainty was the foundation of the trial that never happened. Prosecutors had no defendant, only bones and a diary. They could present evidence of Bellamy's madness, his ritualistic murders, and his careful concealment. But without the man himself, the case became more a historical record than a legal one. The victims' families struggled with the absence of accountability. They wanted to see Bellamy in chains, to hear a judge pronounce him guilty. Instead, they were left with unanswered questions. Could the law condemn a ghost? Could there be justice without a trial? The press leaned into the mystery. Articles speculated on Bellamy's fate, feeding public fascination. The director who vanished became a headline repeated across the nation. Rumors flourished, sightings of him in Paris cafes, whispers of a recluse living in the Italian countryside, tales of an eccentric American director staging plays in Buenos Aires. Each rumor kept the legend alive, but none provided closure. Court records reveal that authorities considered posthumous charges, a symbolic trial in absentia, but they were dismissed as legally meaningless. Instead, the case was shelved into archives, labeled unsolved. The frustration was palpable. Detective Anna Riedel, who had spearheaded the reconstruction of the crimes, wrote in her notes, "We have the evidence, we have the victims, we even have the method. What we do not have is the man. Without Bellamy, there can be no justice. Without justice, the theater becomes not only his stage, but his grave, for the law as well as the lives he stole." The families held memorials, but the absence of conviction left their grief raw. One victim's son, now an old man, said to reporters, "It feels like he killed them twice. First their lives, and now their justice." And yet, some investigators suspected that Bellamy might have had help in his disappearance. The testimonies about masked accomplices resurfaced, suggesting that others may have covered his escape. If so, those individuals had evaded detection for decades, their silence ensuring Bellamy's crimes faded into urban legend. Historians pointed out another troubling detail. Bellamy's diary ended abruptly. The final entry was written the week before the theater's collapse. "The play is nearly perfect. Soon I too will join them beneath the boards. Or perhaps I will not." The director must decide when to step into the role of actor. The ambiguity of those words haunted scholars. Did Bellamy mean to kill himself and lie among his victims? Or did he mean to reinvent himself, escaping into anonymity while his legend grew? In the decades that followed, the story of Bellamy's vanished trial became almost as famous as the crimes themselves. The theater's ruins became a pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts. Urban explorers claimed to hear whispers beneath the rubble, as though the actors still begged for applause. And every so often, a new rumor of Bellamy's survival would surface, reigniting the debate. The trial that never happened left behind something more enduring than a conviction. It left a void. That void was filled with speculation, folklore, and myth. Bellamy had staged not just a play, not just a murder, but his own disappearance. And in doing so, he achieved what he always wanted, to ensure that his name would never be forgotten. For the victims, however, remembrance was a bitter substitute for justice. Their bones told the truth, but the law could not. The stage had claimed them, and without a trial, it seemed the stage had claimed justice as well. But the story was not finished. Detectives and historians still hunted for new leads, new documents, new evidence. Each new fragment offered the possibility of rewriting the ending of one day, perhaps staging the trial that history denied. Until then, the city lived with its ghost. A director who vanished into the shadows, a cast that never took a final bow, and a courtroom that stood forever empty. Chapter 10, Legacy of the Stage. The discovery of bones beneath Bellamy's theater should have closed a chapter in the city's history. Instead, it opened a new one that blurred the line between crime and legend, law and performance, memory and myth. With no trial, no definitive end to Bellamy's story, the legacy of his crimes seeped into culture, shaping the way the city remembered its darkest secret. The haunted reputation. Almost immediately, the theater became synonymous with the macabre. Long after its demolition, the ruins drew thrill seekers, ghost hunters, and urban explorers. They claimed to hear footsteps echoing through collapsed beams, or voices murmuring lines from forgotten scripts. Some swore they heard applause in the dark, faint and mocking. Local folklore gave the site a name, the Stage of Shadows. Tour guides whispered that the victims' spirits were trapped beneath the boards, forever rehearsing for a final performance that would never end. Whether one believed the stories or not, the reputation was powerful enough to keep investors from rebuilding on the land. The lot where the theater once stood remained empty for decades, as if cursed. the cultural obsession. True crime writers descended on the case. Dozens of books chronicled Bellamy's life and crimes, each offering new theories. Some painted him as a genius-turned-madman, others as a sadist who hid behind art to indulge his darkest urges. His diary, reproduced in fragments, became a chilling bestseller, studied not only by criminologists, but also by theater historians fascinated by the way he fused performance and murder. Stage productions inspired by his crimes emerged, often controversial. One avant-garde director staged a play called Eternal Curtain, in which actors performed beneath the stage in partial darkness, never seen by the audience. Critics accused the production of exploiting tragedy, but tickets sold out for months. Even cinema embraced the story. A black-and-white film from the 1950s, The Phantom Director, dramatized Bellamy's descent into madness. Later, horror films exaggerated his legend, depicting him as a vengeful ghost haunting actors who dared to perform his scripts. Academic debate. Bellamy also entered the world of academia. Psychologists analyzed him as a case study in narcissistic pathology, citing his obsession with permanence and control. Theater scholars debated whether his crimes were an extension of his artistic philosophy. Was he merely insane, or had he consciously tried to immortalize his work through murder? Seminars were held at universities with titles like Performance, Power, and Death, The Case of Victor Bellamy. Students debated whether art could ever justify cruelty, even when pursued to the point of madness. Bellamy, in death, became what he most wanted to be in life, a figure people could not stop talking about. Impact on victims' families. For the families of the victims, this legacy was cruel. They fought to keep the focus on the lives lost, rather than the man who had taken them. Memorial plaques were erected with the victims' names, yet Bellamy's name was always louder, always center stage. The director's shadow consumed their stories. Some families rejected any retelling, refusing interviews, unwilling to see their loved ones' pain turned into entertainment. Others engaged with the publicity, believing that by keeping this story alive, the victims would not be forgotten. For them, silence would have been the final cruelty. The symbol of the city. Over time, Bellamy's theater became more than a crime scene. It became a symbol of the city itself, a reminder of how ambition and secrecy could corrupt even the brightest lights. The phrase, a Bellamy production, entered local slang, used to describe anything elaborate, sinister, or doomed. Even new theaters built years later could not escape comparison to the stage of shadows. The legend also changed how theaters were designed. Architects incorporated stricter safety and surveillance measures, ensuring that trapdoors and understructures were carefully documented. It was as if the city itself wanted to exorcise Bellamy's influence from every new stage. An unfinished story. The most enduring aspect of Bellamy's legacy was its lack of resolution. Without a trial, without a confirmed death, his story was unfinished. That ambiguity kept the case alive far longer than it might otherwise have lasted. Every rumor of his survival, every rediscovered playbill, every whispered ghost story added another act to his performance. And so the legend of Victor Bellamy achieved what he had always desired: permanence. His victims remained bound to his narrative, their tragedy feeding his myth. Scholars still debated his intentions. Directors still borrowed from his style. Tourists still sought the shadows of his theater. In the end, Bellamy had created not just a play, not just a murder, but a legacy of eternal rehearsal. The applause never ended, the curtain never fell, and the stage never truly went dark. The city could demolish the theater, bury the bones, and silence the whispers. But Bellamy's performance, grotesque, horrifying, unforgettable, had already found its audience. The legacy of the stage was this: some performances never end.